When is a gacha game more than just a gacha game? Well, when it's Sword of Convallaria. My name is Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman, and welcome back to the channel. Hello everyone. If you enjoy what I do, my coverage of turn-based strategy RPGs, standard RPGs, or the gaming sphere in general, a like on this video and a subscription to the channel would be very much appreciated. Thank you so much. And also thank you to developer XD and the PR team at Big Games Machine for giving me an early access code to Sword of Convallaria. They're not sponsoring this video, but I appreciate them letting me see the game early all the same and give my thoughts on it. So what is Sword of Convallaria? Well, it is a new turn-based strategy RPG from developers XD. It draws clear inspiration from Final Fantasy Tactics and Tactics Ogre, and actually went so far as to bring in Hitoshi Sakmioto himself, the famed composer of the OSTs for Ogre Battle March of the Black Queen, Tactics Ogre, Final Fantasy Tactics, Final Fantasy XII, and so many other beloved games with incredible soundtracks. And he's here doing the score for Sword of Convallaria. I've played approximately the first 5 hours of the game out of a 10-hour demo that I was provided, and I have to say that while I was initially skeptical, I really like Sword of Convallaria. I say that now because the initial hour or so of the game was kind of shaky for me due to Sword's nature as a, at least partial, gacha title. If you, like me, aren't interested in playing a gacha game right now, either because you just don't like them as a concept, or you don't have the time for one in your life right now, as I typically don't, I can see it being a turnoff for you. But don't worry, we'll talk about that and why I feel you should push through right now. So, is Sword of Convallaria a gacha or not? Well, the answer is a bit of column A, a bit of column B. The game has two modes, the online Fool's Journey gacha mode and the offline Spiral of Destinies single-player campaign. You start off in the Fool's Journey, where you're taught about the gacha mechanics, the overall story of the world, are introduced to some of the characters, but then after the tutorial, you're given the option to either continue the Fool's Journey gacha mode, or split off into the Spiral of Destinies single-player campaign, which is what I did. I haven't had the time to mess around with any of the gacha side of things really yet. We'll talk about what little I saw in a second here, but the single-player campaign is a classic, traditional FFT Tactics Ogre style story campaign. All the elements that you would expect from one of those types of games is here, and pretty much none of the gacha elements are. One exception, we'll talk about that. Like I said, the game starts you off with the gacha elements through the tutorial, establishing the world and its characters, teaching you about how combat works, showing you character summoning mechanics, all that type of stuff. And it involves hopping between worlds and timelines to fix problems and try and set the world to rights, figure out what's going on in the celestial tapestry of the world. It certainly seems interesting, but again, I haven't had the chance to toy with it that much yet. The gacha mechanics are very similar to Genshin Impact, if you're familiar with that, and as one of the only gacha games that I've really spent any significant amount of time in, it is my main point of reference. There's banners that you can pull characters and weapons from separately, of course. Each of these must also be leveled separately, but what's interesting is that when you pull characters, you can pull both generic units and named units to build out your army. So even though it is a gacha style game where you're summoning characters, you still get that experience of having an army of generics as well as some unique characters with maybe their own classes or skills or what have you, which is nice. I appreciate that they went for that, because that's a very core part of a lot of games like the Tactics series, in my opinion. Something else that's interesting and I think could make for a better gameplay experience in general is that everything and everyone starts as a 1-star, and you can choose who you level up to 5 stars over time by investing resources in them. So it's not like you're going to pull a 3-star hero or soldier or whatever, and they're just going to be immediately outclassed the second you pull a 5-star unique character. Will the unique character probably wind up stronger in the end? Sure, probably. I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case. But the fact that you have the opportunity to choose who you level up and actually make them good seems like a pretty solid gameplay decision. As I mentioned, I have no real experience with the gacha mechanics or its resources outside of the tutorial, as I jumped right into the single-player Spiral of Destinies as soon as I could. This mode follows the same story beats of the gacha as best as I can tell, but in a much more linear, coherent, grounded way. We start as a tactician who joins the local mercenary guild after being rescued from prison to handle problems of the common folk while the kingdoms around you go to war. You start with the same named characters as the gacha mode, but oddly, they do have different abilities than their gacha counterparts, something that I assume was probably done for gameplay balance reasons, which is fair. As far as other characters are concerned, you don't need to engage with the gacha at all, as you will recruit generic units, name generics, and unique characters as you progress through the story and unlock new facilities in the town, like the inn, where you can hire troops. The only other connection to the gacha side of the game that I've seen is the need for these keys to unlock more chapters of the story, and at least in the demo version of the game that I played, you start with a batch of keys, and I never used all of them. But seeing as how they can be purchased with the resource known as Hope Luxite, which is essentially the primo gems of the game from what I can tell in the shop, I assume that there may come a time where the game wants you to buy them. It is important to note that you do get this Luxite from progressing in the story as well, but I have no way of knowing for now if it'll be enough to consistently make progress without paying real money, so I feel it bears mentioning. But with talk of gacha and its assorted woes and mechanics aside, how does Sword of Convallaria play in the Spiral of Destinies? Well, the answer is pretty damn well. Interestingly, battles are quite short and quick with small parties, at least in the early game. It was fairly common for me to have no more than 4 units at play at a time, and the maps are fairly small to accommodate those smaller party sizes. There is a Fire Emblem-esque type effectiveness, weapon triangle sort of thing going on here, as there are 5 unit types: Seekers, Breakers, Defenders, Watchers, and Destroyers. Seekers counter Breakers, Breakers counter Defenders, and Defenders counter Seekers. Watchers in turn counter Destroyers, and oddly enough, Destroyers don't counter anything, so I'm not sure if they're just, like, the low man on the totem pole, or if they're that absurdly powerful on their own that they can't really afford to have any effectiveness against any particular unit type. I haven't had the chance to play with Destroyers very much, so I can't really say one way or the other, but it is odd that they don't have any sort of effectiveness bonus. This is important as well, because units deal a lot of damage if they have the type advantage. I mean, like, a lot of damage, and they deal far, far less if they're at a disadvantage. When I mean a lot of damage, I'm talking like you can easily one-shot an enemy unit if you have an appropriately leveled unit who has a type advantage against them. It's pretty insane, and it makes for some pretty dynamic and intense battles. And of course, as you can imagine, having a diverse array of units that you can deploy to match what the enemy is fielding is important, as well as having a large army for other reasons that we'll get into. Every unit has unique abilities, both passive and active, that differentiate them even in the same class. There's, different types of Seekers, Breakers, Defenders, all that type of good stuff. And the unique abilities thus far have been fairly interesting, from everything as simple as a big spear stab that can knock an enemy back or reduce some of their stats, to some sort of triple flurry blade attack that deals bonus damage if you hit them from behind, different types of leg shots to reduce enemy movement with your archers, all that type of fun stuff. There is a good variety of things going on, even very early in the game, so I'm excited to see, as you level up your units and hire better mercenaries and more involved classes, what types of things will become available to you. I mentioned them already, but you do have ranged units. The thing that's important to note, however, is that unlike other games like FFT and Tactics Ogre, their range is quite short. Like, my archer has a range of like 3, and he can't attack in melee range. So having him moved up with the rest of your squad is very important, but it also makes them very vulnerable, so you need to make sure that you can defend them with your sword and board knights, or your big two-handed greatsword wielders, or what have you. This is made doubly challenging because you are typically heavily outnumbered, though, again, the high damage nature of the game makes quickly dispatching small groups before others can move in and reinforce them at least a bit more manageable. I think the highest number of enemies I've seen on a map at one time was no more than 8, and there were a few times where there were more, but it was because reinforcements came in over time, so it wasn't really like I was getting mobbed by a whole squad of 15 dudes. As far as terrain is concerned, maps can be fairly hilly, nothing too vertical thus far, but it is important to pay attention to where you're navigating your units, how you're going to path around to the enemy, if you're going to get flanked, etc., etc. As far as I've seen, there's not really any terrain effects a la something like Triangle Strategy, where grass can be set on fire or whatever. It's more traditional to Final Fantasy Tactics, Tactics Ogre, where it might inhibit your movement or your defense, but nothing too crazy beyond just who has the height advantage. And that is important, because high ground, it does give you an increase to your damage and your defense. And again, as I mentioned before, your named characters are strong, but they've not felt necessary over or just overtly better than your generic units. I've gone in and cleared plenty of battles with just 3 generics who happen to be the right class type and have a good mix of abilities, and not felt like I was really struggling at all. Again, how will that scale into the late game? Hard to say, but But given that Sword prides itself on the inspiration that it has taken from classics like FFT and Tactics Ogre, they should know that having an army of generics that you can make into essentially walking gods is a very big thing for fans of the genre, so I imagine they will have accommodated for that. Outside of battle, you manage the town of Convallaria by taking on dispatch missions a la FFT Advance and A2, which I very much appreciate. I did miss having things like that in Tactics Ogre Reborn or when I replay Final Fantasy Tactics, as well as smaller quests that you can learn about from people around the town. These quests reward units, gear, materials you can use to upgrade your army, and the town itself, money, consumables, and you can also assign inactive units to be trained or forge new weapons, as well as making units rest to recover stamina and health. There's a lot going on here, and I do enjoy that there's a bit of a base management mechanic. It's not super overt. It's not something like XCOM 2 where you're building out sections of your ship to have different facilities online or anything like that, but it is a little bit of something to do in between battles, and it makes it feel more like you are actually a standing force protecting a region than just a wandering band of thugs and ne'er-do-wells as you tend to be in like Final Fantasy Tactics. The stamina system that I mentioned is important to note here as well. It's the second reason that you want to have a large, diverse squad of units, as you'll be rotating through your roster regularly to ensure that your units are at maximum stamina and health whenever possible. Seeing as how it can actually take a little while for a unit to get back to full health and stamina, especially if they've been out on a number of consecutive missions, making sure that you have some overlap in terms of what different units are capable of so you're not left without a good Seeker, for example, is important, and I think it's going to be a good way to encourage players to build up a large force. That's something that people always asked me about when I was playing Tactics Ogre Reborn very regularly on the channel. Why do I have such a large army? It's because I'd rather have the diversity to completely change up my strategy if need be in the face of a new challenge, or if something happens and I either lose a unit or I can't have access to a particular unit with a certain role, I have someone who can fill that role instead, and Sword of Convallaria seems to be leaning into that as well, which I like. When you're managing things at the base, it's important to note that you only have so many tasks that you can take on in a given week, so choosing quests and other building tasks, training, resting, all that type of stuff carefully is a must. Once you progress the week, new story events will take place, you'll be forced into new story battles, or other events could happen, gain characters, lose characters, etc. So you won't have time to do everything, and being conscientious about how you're managing your base will be important. Moving on from the gameplay, the story thus far has been fine. I haven't seen enough of it to really draw any conclusions. I am curious about the geopolitics of the world, and the characters are fairly standard but fun. But again, I need to see more. I've really only gotten into the beginning acts of the story. In the demo version of the game that I played, the writing was also a little hit or miss. That definitely needs some editing work. So if that's something that you're sensitive to, I could see it taking you out of the experience, but I can get the gist more than enough to know that I like the characters and that I am curious about the story and where it's going. And of course, editing can always take place over the course of a game's development. It's not a huge deal. Moving on to the graphics, I mean, you've seen what this game has to offer as I've been talking about it. It is beautiful. It's got excellent style, very high quality sprite work, 3D animations. It's like Final Fantasy Tactics brought into the modern era in all the best ways while still staying faithful to that perfect pixel style of the PS1. The animations are very impactful and fun, as I would expect of a gacha title, but we have the benefit of having this whole single player mode, so we can see all these animations, play with all these flashy attacks, but without having to pull for characters or wait to try and get a character or ability that you want. You can just play and have fun with it, and that's great. I love it. Cutscenes are also very dynamic, often incorporating gameplay-like attacks and abilities to make the experience more seamless. If someone charges in to take a hit for one of your allies, they will actually be at lower HP at the start of the fight, or characters will use their actual named attacks to put status debuffs on enemies, or even clear some of them out before the fight begins. It's a really clever way of meshing the story and the gameplay, and it makes the whole thing feel a lot more seamless, which I really appreciate it. There's even one animated, anime-style cutscene that was extremely high quality. I won't show it here because I want you to be able to experience it for yourself, but it was really high quality, dare I say even beautiful. I was really taken aback by it, but I loved to see it. It was really nice. Finally, I'm saving a bit of the best for last here. Let's talk about the OST and the sound design for just a second. It is absolutely, unquestionably phenomenal. As a lifelong devotee of the tactics genre, especially the Final Fantasy Tactics series, I felt like I had come home to a long-lost friend. I mean, you just heard the music. I played some for you. Hitoshi Sakmioto composed his damn heart out here, with occasional familiar notes in every track, while each one is still wholly unique and new. I adore every second of it, and I guarantee that I'll be listening to the OST with joy in my heart for years. This feels like an extended soundtrack, a set of new albums made specifically for Final Fantasy Tactics and Tactics Ogre, but still standing apart and being for a new project. I love that, and it really hammers home for me how important the soundtracks of games are, especially for Final Fantasy Tactics and Tactics Ogre. They would be completely different games to me if they didn't have the music that they do, and it really shows the importance that these soundtracks have. So absolute hats off to Mr. Sakmioto. I adore his work, and I am so happy that Sword of Convallaria brought him on to do the OST here, because it elevates the whole experience so much. As far as other sound design is concerned, the sound of attacks is also really good, satisfying, impactful, although it can occasionally be marred by repetitive combat barks from named characters, but either you just use different characters, rotate them in and out so you don't get too tired of it, or you just use generics who don't have barks, and problem solved, not a big deal. All in all, I was extremely impressed with my time with Sword of Convallaria. It's a game that people have asked me about for months leading up to its soon-to-be release, and I was always a little skeptical because every time that I looked into it, I saw, well, it's a gacha, and while I'm not someone who is opposed to playing gachas, I love Genshin Impact, I think it's a really good game. I spent a lot of time with Fire Emblem Heroes before the game balance kind of fell off, but that's a different issue. I'm just not someone who has the time anymore to devote to keeping track of new banners, figuring out what characters are good, doing dailies to build up resources to make sure that I have enough polls saved up to get a character that I want. I don't have the time for it right now. So I'd always kind of written it off as something that I would never get around to playing. But when Big Games Machine reached out to me and clarified that there is, in fact, an entire single-player campaign that seems like a lot of love has been put into it, that piqued my interest, and I'm so glad that I decided to check it out, because I do think this one has chops. If you're a fan of both classic single-player, offline, FFT-style games, and also gacha games, I mean, this seems like it's going to be a must for you. And there's a very good chance that as I play the single-player, I will just dabble with the gacha side of things and see how they play, and I'm sure I'll have a good time with it. I just don't know that I'll be able to mainline it like a lot of those types of games want you to. So with that said, I highly recommend that you check out Sword of Convallaria. If you're watching this video on release, it is just a day prior to Steam Next Fest, where you'll be able to see the game for yourself, check it out. In fact, there might actually already be a demo up on Steam now that I think about it. I have to check, but I believe there is. So if you like what you see here, you like what you're hearing me say about it, then go check it out, man. This one has legs, absolutely. And I'm so happy that we've got another tactics-style game coming on the horizon. That really seems like it's got developers behind it who know what they're doing and care about the genre. With that said, though, I'm going to wrap this one up here. Thank you to all of my patrons and YouTube members who've been supporting me over the years and continue to help make videos like this and just the continuation of the channel possible. You wonderful folks from Patreon are Caffeine System, 18C, Navi, Kejo, Christian Soto, Chris Muller, Yoking Haddock 67, and Riley Thatcher. And from my YouTube members, thank you so much to Canadian Animator Guy, Tojo Jr., Luxor, Caffeine System, Tenchi, Matthew Barry, King Tony, John Eaton, Captain Planet, Light B, Midday Moonlight, Matthew Snyder, RJD, Michael Poole, Dre, X13, Rocktopudge, Segno, and Bertus Aditya. Again, you guys are the best. I love you all so much, and you make doing this so much easier and so much more fun. So huge shout out to all of you. My name has been Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman. Go enjoy Sword of Convallaria. Thank you to the devs for the key. I hope you all have a good night. Stay safe and healthy out there. And remember, be good to each other. Bye now.